The comparative analysis between Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, 1997, and Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, reveals a subversive appropriation of horror thriller tropes through the lens of military satire. Although 40 years separate these works, Verhoeven engages in a direct dialogue with Hitchcockian aesthetics to highlight the violence inherent in the society he depicts. In both cases, the knife is the triggering element. In Hitchcock's work, the kitchen knife embodies the intrusion of violence into domestic and intimate space. In Verhoeven's film, the combat knife, thrown by Sergeant Zim, literally pins a recruit's hand to a wall. This gesture echoes Psycho's blade. The instrument of death is an extension of the arm of authority or madness. In Starship Troopers, the knife serves to neutralize, punish, and teach, just as the knife in Psycho neutralizes definitely Marion Crane. The bladed weapon is the tool of a brutal penetration that ruptures the physical integrity of the body. From the blood shower to the group shower, the shower scene serves as the erotic tipping point in both films. Psycho uses nudity to accentuate the vulnerability of Marion Crane, the victim, creating a tragic eroticism where the pleasure of warm water is interrupted by metal. Starship Troopers, however, subverts this iconography by presenting a collective co-ed shower. Eroticism is omnipresent but, paradoxically, neutralized by the film's ideology. The bodies are beautiful, young, and naked, yet they have become mere interchangeable tools of war. Where Marion Crane is alone and lusted after by a voyeur, Verhoeven's soldiers are observed by the spectator voyeur. But their sexual desire is entirely sublimated by the desire for military service and following warrior mission in the infantry. The representation of blood visually links the two sequences. In Psycho, the famous shot of blood swirling down the shower drain symbolizes the loss of life and the end of hope. Verhoeven mirrors this image during the knife training. Blood spurts from the pierced hand with surgical precision. While Hitchcock's blood is black, filmed in black and white to avoid censorship, Verhoeven's is a bright, almost cartoonish red, emphasizing the grotesque nature of military violence. In both films, blood marks the transition from a desiring subject, Marion or the soldier, to that of butchered meat. The indiscernible killer and the invisible threat. A major structural commonality lies in the identity of the aggressor. In Psycho, the killer is hidden behind a shower curtain, a blurred, androgynous silhouette that makes the threat universal and unpredictable. In Starship Troopers, during the training session, the threat comes from a superior who punishes arbitrarily, but it is primarily the shadow of war and the arachnids that hangs over the shower scene. The killer is indiscernible because the threat is systemic. It is the state maybe and the arachnids certainly the total enemy in Starship Troopers or the shattered psyche in Psycho. In both instances, the individual is hunted by a force that transcends them or surges inside them, which strikes suddenly. Finally, the use of editing brings these two cinematic moments together. Hitchcock's shower scene is famous for its 70 camera angles in 45 seconds, creating a sensation of visual laceration. Verhoeven also employs nervous editing during the knife incident, where the speed of the projectile and the recruit's scream instantly shatter the routine of training. This brutal rupture serves to plunge the spectator into a state of shock, forcing them to confront the fragility of skin against steel, whether it be a crime of passion or fanatical military discipline.
In Hitchcock, Psycho, 1960, everything is condensed into a single block of erotic, voyeuristic, and deadly tension. Norman's gaze through the hole in the wall, explicit, almost masturbatory voyeurism, leads directly to the shower, the water, Marion's vulnerable nudity, the knife that stabs, blood mixing with water, madness and death. It's a unified sequence in which desire, violence, and death are inseparable. The viewer is placed in the position of a complicit voyeur. In Verhoeven, Starship Troopers, 1997, he separates and spreads these elements out over time and space, which radically changes their meaning. First, the knife sequence, During training, Sergeant Zim stabs the knife through Ace's hand, Jake Busey. We see the blood, the wound, the pain, and the almost ritualistic violent gesture. It's brutal, but no one dies. It's an initiation, a demonstration of virility and military discipline. The violence is accepted and institutionalized, almost playful within the film's satirical quasi-totalitarian context. Then the mixed shower scene, naked bodies, water, and apparent eroticism, though strangely sanitized, as Verhoeven often says, these soldiers are without libido, too focused on war. The viewer's voyeurism is invited, but without Hitchcock's sense of guilt, everyone is naked together, equally exposed. There's flirting and camaraderie, a chilling normality in this collective nudity. Death is deferred, it comes later on the battlefield against the bugs, in an industrial and dehumanized way. Verhoeven thus dissociates the knife and blood formative violence from the shower and eroticism, bodies offered to the military machine, whereas in Hitchcock everything converges into one single act of sexual and psychotic murder. This is typical of Verhoeven's method. He takes Hollywood or Hitchcockian codes and twists them into satire. Where Hitchcock makes voyeurism and violence into an intimate pathological disturbance, Verhoeven turns them into a public, normalized, and cheerful spectacle within a quasi-totalitarian society that has integrated violence and bodily exposure as virtues. This separation reinforces the film's satirical message. The society in Starship Troopers has desacralized both death and eroticism to put them in the service of propaganda and war. The blood from the knife is not tragic, it's educational. The naked bodies in the shower are not guilty objects of desire, they are interchangeable resources for the war effort. Disseminating Hitchcockian motifs is what Starship Troopers enacts here. Verhoeven doesn't imitate, he dismantles and reassembles to critique the society of the spectacle and militarism.
Hitchcock condenses a moment of individual psychic crisis. Verhoeven disseminates and normalizes the same elements, knife, blood, water, nudity, gaze, within a biopolitical and ideological apparatus. This diffraction is not merely stylistic, it is profoundly philosophico-political. 1. Hitchcock, private pathology as symptom of repressive modernity. In Psycho, the voyeurism shower sequence forms a compact block in which Eros and Thanatos, Freud, are tightly intertwined. The hole in the wall is a perfect metaphor for the modern split. The subject, Norman, is both spectator and repressed actor of a desire he can only express through violence. The gaze is guilty, transgressive, and death arrives quickly within a frame of madness. Philosophically, we are in a Lacanian register where the real erupts. The knife piercing Marian's body materializes lack and castration. The blood mixing with shower water symbolizes the impossibility of separating desire from destruction. The puritanical American society of the 1950 and 1960 years is portrayed as a producer of intimate monsters. Sexual repression breeds psychosis. Sociologically, it is an implicit critique of modern individualism. Violence remains private, shameful, and hidden. The viewer is placed in the position of a complicit voyeur, and therefore guilty. Hitchcock tells us, the monster is within us, and civilization barely manages to contain it. The shower becomes a site of absolute vulnerability, purification that turns into sacrifice. 2. Starship Troopers underlines a biopolitical normalization in a quasi-totalitarian society of spectacle. In Starship Troopers, the knife, training, mixed shower sequence deliberately dissociates these elements. Verhoeven, as a radical ironist, brings into the open what Hitchcock kept in the shadows. The knife in the hand, this is no longer the act of a madman, but a perfectly institutionalized initiation rite. Violence is pedagogical and formative. It echoes Agamben's Homo Caesar. In this work, Giorgio Agamben explains that the soldier's body is both sacralized, as a citizen of the Federation, and exposed to legitimate violence. The wound is not tragic, it is productive. Bodies are being shaped into docile yet powerful instruments like in Discipline and Punish, from Michel Foucault. Pain is immediately integrated into an economy of virility and merit. You're doing great. The mixed shower, this reveals the most chilling biopolitical dimension. Naked, young, athletic bodies are offered to the gaze without guilt or genuine erotic intensity. As Verhoeven has often stated, these soldiers are asexual, their libido is entirely redirected toward war. Nudity is no longer transgressive, as in Psycho, but functional. It signals the formal equality of bodies in service to the state and their total availability. This is an almost perfect illustration of the society of control, according to the text written by Gilles Deleuze, or biopolitics, according to the concept elaborated by Michel Foucault, taken to its satirical extreme. The body no longer belongs to the individual, it is a collective resource. The shower is no longer a place of intimate vulnerability or individual purification, but a space of ideological socialization where one has to be naked in front of others and learns not to be ashamed of one's body or one's violence, and where there is no secret, and also where one has to be very talkative and vocal. 3. Philosophico-political point of view. Verhoeven performs a Baudrillardian inversion, where Psycho still depicts a society of law and prohibition, even as it collapses. Starship Troopers portrays a hypermodern society in which transgression has become the norm. The satirical authoritarian regime of Starship Troopers is not one of terror, but one of seduction. You are made to love your own instrumentalization. Hitchcock diagnoses the illness of the individual within liberal modernity. Verhoeven shows how this modernity, when pushed to its logical conclusion, post-democratic, mediatized, militaristic, cures the subject by dissolving him into the warrior collective and the spectacle. Blood is no longer a sign of guilt, it becomes a sign of military training, teaching, and social health. Conclusion. 2 critiques of America. Psycho films the puritanical America of the 1950s that produces Norman Bates. Starship Troopers films the triumphant America of the 1990s that produces Johnny Rico, handsome, smiling, and ready to exterminate the other, the bugs equals designated enemies, with no moral questioning. In one case, the shower washes away the blood of an individual crime. In the other, it prepares bodies for the collective bloodbath to come. This may be one of the most intelligent critiques ever made of democratic militarism, not by showing it as monstrous, but by making it desirable, sexy, and fun. Starship Troopers does not say, it's quasi a totalitarian regime. He says, look how seductive it is, and how close we already are.
In Hitchcock's Psycho, violence is pathological, private, and transgressive. It erupts uncontrollably, hidden away, and is tied to individual madness. In contrast, in Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, violence is pedagogical, public, and institutionalized. It serves the training of citizen soldiers, and is an integral part of the social and military system. Regarding the body, Hitchcock presents it as an object of individual desire and destruction. Marion's body is vulnerable, secretly desired, and then brutally destroyed in an intimate and tragic act. Verhoeven, on the other hand, turns it into an interchangeable biopolitical resource. The recruits' bodies are young, athletic, collectively exposed, and treated as raw material in service to the state in war. As for the gaze, Hitchcock loads it with a guilty, voyeuristic, and morally heavy dimension. The viewer, like Norman, feels complicit and disturbed by what they see. In Verhoeven's film, the gaze becomes neutral, collective, and depthless. Voyeurism is no longer a source of guilt. It is normalized, shared, and almost innocent in a context where everyone is equally exposed. When it comes to the relationship to death, in Hitchcock it is immediate, intimate, and tragic. Death arrives abruptly in the shower as a personal and irreversible shock. In Starship Troopers, death is deferred, industrial, and spectacular. It does not occur in the shower sequence, but is postponed to the battlefield, where it becomes a heroic and collective element of the propaganda narrative. Finally, eroticism in Psycho is charged, repressed, and mortiferous. Sexual desire is tightly intertwined with guilt and destruction. Starship Troopers offers instead an aseptic, cheerful, and propagandistic eroticism. Nudity is visible, light, and almost playful, but stripped of any real intensity because it is entirely placed in the service of military ideology and camaraderie. In summary, Psycho embodies a modern society still marked by repression, individual guilt, and intimate pathology. Starship Troopers, through his satire, depicts a hypermodern society in which these same elements, violence, nudity, gaze, have been absorbed, normalized, and transformed into positive tools of social control and collective mobilization. Transgression has become the norm, and guilt has almost disappeared in favor of a joyful adherence to the system which will make blood flow, as hinted with a knife piercing the hand.
We can try a potentially sharp and rich analogy. This analogy could try to capture Verhoeven's irony well, which could echo, in a distorted and amplified way, Hitchcock's perversity. The parallel between the two scenes and the two films works on several levels. The shower as a place of naked vulnerability, the knife as a vector of violent penetration, and above all the rational madness that underlies both acts of violence. Individual violence versus institutional violence. In Psycho, Norman Bates, or Mother, embodies individual pathological, repressed, sexual, and criminal madness. The knife is the phallic extension of a broken psyche. The shower is an intimate, almost sacred space, the purifying water that becomes the stage for a sadistic and seemingly irrational execution. In Starship Troopers, Sergeant Zim, Clancy Brown, wields the knife in the ultra-rational context of military training. It is a pedagogical, preparatory, institutional violence. He wounds a recruit, Ace, to teach him. The body is a disposable tool in the service of the Federation. The co-ed shower, meanwhile, is the image of a society that has normalized the exposure of bodies and their collective availability. The recruits wash together, laugh, flirt, as if nudity and the coming death were already integrated into daily life. The water no longer purifies, it prepares them for the slaughterhouse. The young soldiers are washed, disinfected, and made interchangeable before being offered to the Minotaur, the soft totalitarian state, the war against the bugs. The two forms of violence overlap because they reveal the same cruel truth. Civilization does not eliminate barbarism. It organizes it, rationalizes it, and gives it a uniform or a moral pretext. Let's focus on fault, choice, and lack of redemption. Marion Crane cheats, she steals in money. Her fault is individual and petty bourgeois. She pays in full, with no trial, no catharsis. Hitchcock films death as an absurd, mechanical punishment. The water flows, the blood dilutes, but nothing is washed away. Verhoeven's recruits choose, at least apparently they enlist for citizenship, prestige, and sexual desire, the famous service guarantees citizenship. Their fault is accepting the rules of the foul play offered by a quasi-totalitarian regime. They enter the machine naked. Their deaths will be statistical, heroic on screen, grotesque in reality. In both cases, there is no redemption. Hitchcock shows it through psychological nihilism, Verhoeven through political satire. The Moloch state devours its willing children with a propagandistic smile. The implacable, strangely rational madness is exactly the Verhoeven tone. The horror is all the more terrifying because it is presented as healthy, desirable, and fun. Is it the one and same madness? Yes, in a way. Madness is not only in the isolated psychopath. It lies in the system that turns young people into cannon fodder while making them believe they are heroes. Verhoeven, like Hitchcock, films the moment when the rational tips into the irrational. Propaganda, training, and camaraderie become the mask of a ritual sacrifice. Hitchcock shows us horror in the private sphere. Verhoeven generalizes it to the public and political sphere. The knife passes from the trembling hand of the murderous son to the firm, pedagogical hand of the officer. The result is the same: blood and water. Starship Troopers is sometimes underestimated as a satire because its irony is too effective. We laugh, we get aroused, we're excited by the war machine which is denounced. Exactly like the citizens in his film. Psycho, on the other hand, doesn't even allow us that guilty pleasure. It freezes us. The two films complete each other very well.
It remains to explore the question of the satire. Are both of these films satires? It's true, but they don't target the same audiences at all. As for whether Starship Troopers, 1997, is a satire of Psycho, 1960, through the shower scene, it's a bit more subtle than a simple parody. 1. Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock, 1960, a satire of American Puritanism. Although it's often classified as a pure thriller and horror film, Psycho is a biting satire of the morality of 1950s America. Hitchcock enjoys breaking the taboos of the time. Money and sex. The film begins with adultery in a seedy hotel and the theft of money, very materialistic motives. He breaks also the taboo of the family unit. The film mocks the sacred image of the mother, portraying her as a psychological monster. The taboo of the institution is touched as well. The police and authority figures are often presented as ineffective or out of touch. 2. Starship Troopers, Paul Verhoeven, 1997. A satire of militaristic authoritarianism or even totalitarianism and the military-industrial complex. Here, the satire is much more direct and often misunderstood upon its release. Verhoeven uses the conventions of the Hollywood blockbuster to criticize imperialism. Humans are the aggressors, yet present themselves as victims. The film criticizes also propaganda. The film is interspersed with "Wanna know more?" or "I'm doing my part," advertisements that mimic Nazi propaganda films. The dehumanization is criticized. The soldiers are handsome, perfect, but completely devoid of empathy or critical thinking. 3. The shower scene, a satire of a satire. It's fascinating to compare the shower scene in Starship Troopers to the iconic one in Psycho. Verhoeven's reference to Hitchcock serves to subvert the original message. The contrast between the two scenes. Characteristics: Psycho, 1960 versus Starship Troopers, 1997. Atmosphere: intimate, vulnerable, terrifying, versus collective, relaxed, banal. Gender and sex: male voyeurism, aggression, versus total co-ed, no sexual tension. Threat: the individual, the domestic killer, versus the state, which even owns the bodies. Function of the shower scene: brutal rupture of the narrative, versus exposure of ideological brainwashing. Why it's subversive? In Psycho, the shower is the site of ultimate vulnerability and punished sin. In Starship Troopers, the shower scene is collective and co-ed. Men and women bathe together without anyone glancing at each other with desire. This is where Starship Troopers' satire lies. He depicts a society so militarized and obsessed with war that sexual desire, the basis of Hitchcock's satire, has been completely erased in favor of warrior camaraderie. The subtle nod, the knife from Psycho, the weapon of the intimate crime, becomes a throwing weapon in Starship Troopers during a brutal training exercise. The enemy can't press a button if you've immobilized their hand with a knife. In short, if Starship Troopers parodies Psycho, it's to show that in the very dystopian and faraway future it depicts, or maybe not so dystopian and not so faraway future in some parts of the world, evil is no longer hidden behind a shower curtain by a deranged individual, but has become a state institution, clean and accepted by all.